Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. My name is Anan Hanna, and I lead the Solutions Architect team here at Securematics. Today, we wanted to have a little bit of discussion about the SmartZone and what makes it better. So we have Jesse here from Ruckus to discuss this. And in case if you have any questions, please feel free to type it in on the chat box. But before I hand it out to Jesse, I wanted actually to highlight a couple of information about Securematics. So we are a distille for Ruckus, as you know, and I can see from the name that I have worked with many of you, and there are some that I am looking forward to work with. So please feel free to contact either my team or your account rep. We have a dedicated solutions architect team, so you will have a dedicated SE to your account that can help you with jumping on calls with your partners, assist you with building the bill of material and design, assist also with creating heat map reports if you need that, which would make and expedite the sales cycle, and enable you to place the exact number of the APs and on the exact location. Feel free to reach out to us. We will be also more than happy to assist with giving you any alternatives. Of course, all vendors now have difficulties with the inventory, and we can definitely assist with providing you with any alternatives that's available in our stock, and we can work on that for sure. I also wanted to highlight our demo pool program. We have a very refreshed demo pool devices, including the new Wi-Fi 6 access points. So please feel free to hop into our website, which is mentioned here on the screen, securematics.com partner, and then hits up the partner and then demo pool, and you can simply fill out a small form with name and the purpose of the of your request, and you can choose your model of the access point, and we usually ship it the next day. So feel free to utilize that demo pool program. We also have our partner portal, which can enable you and give you all the tools required for checking our inventory without contacting any of us, any of our team. So you can check the inventory, you can check the status of your order, you can submit an RMA, you can download your codes and invoices. I'm sorry, invoices, you can always get it from your sales rep. But feel free to sign up for a partner portal if you don't have an account for that. Next slide, I wanted to share actually our team. We have our team dedicated actually for your, and recently we have who joined our team as a vendor business manager. We have also Robbie Mattel, who is doing the Ruckus business development management. So I'm sure you know both of them. Please feel free to reach out to them. And besides our actually sales team, who will be showing on the next slide, we are here. I just wanted to say we are here to assist and help. So feel free to utilize and let us know if you need anything. From here, I will hand it out to Jesse, and then to talk about the SmartZone, and we will come back and answer your questions in case if you have any. Thank you. Jesse, floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Anan. So hello, everybody. My name is Jesse East. I am an inside systems engineer here with Ruckus CommScope. I'm filling in today. If you saw the invitation, Sean Hogston's name was on there. I'm filling in for him today. He put the content together, so you know it's in good hands from that regard. But we're going to be going over SmartZone. So, more of an introductory, what is SmartZone? How can you use SmartZone? How can you position SmartZone? And really at the end of the day, how can it be beneficial to you and your customers as well? So definitely hope you get some good information out of this. I'll reiterate what Anan said at the beginning. If at any point in time you have any questions, you want to call those out, please feel free to throw those down in the chat window below. I know those are going to be monitored during the course of the presentation here. We are going to have some time at the tail end for some focused Q&A. So if those don't get seen and addressed, as we're going along, they'll definitely get touched on at the end. And I do think we might be a little bit short on the end there, so some extra time for some Q&A as that goes along. So let's just jump right into it here with SmartZone. So of course, before we begin, always at the beginning of these presentations, this brief comment on the NDA. This helps us be a little more open with you as we have these kind of discussions. So hopefully just be aware of this and know that, of course, as we move along, some of this will be a little bit more potentially useful information thanks to this handy disclaimer here. So to kick things off with the SmartZone specifically. So the SmartZone, as it stands today, is what I would call our flagship controller. We have a number of different wireless controllers. Hopefully you're familiar with some, maybe this is an introduction to some others. But as those products have kind of developed and grown over the course of time, the SmartZone definitely stands as our flagship, as our main carrier as it is today. It typically gets the attention first of R&D resources. When new access points are launched, SmartZone is typically the first to bat for those. So compatibility will launch first on SmartZone before others, and does tend to have a little bit more of a richer feature set than some of its peers. So brief history on the SmartZone, how we got to that point from where it stands today. So originally, the SmartZone was conceived of what was called the Smart Cell Gateway. This came around in the 2011 timeframe. And really, this product was focused on the carrier space. So at the time, the Zone Director Controller was the go-to in the Ruckus portfolio for the enterprise grade type customer. But there was something extra needed to get that extra oomph for a carrier class customer who had hundreds upon thousands of access points in its way. So that initial GA release for the SmartZone was in version 2.5. The most recent version that's out today is 6.0. So you can see there have been a large number of iterations on this product, over the time period. Lots of effort going into it, increasing focus into its development. Something I'll highlight on here really quick, and I'll get back to a little bit later in the presentation. Even though the most current release is 6.0, that's what I'd call a short-term release. So 6.1 is really going to be the the focus release for that for a longer term. So if you are looking to move potential customers over to SmartZone as it stands right now, I would definitely recommend you look at 5.2.2. Which is the golden release, the stable release for that version of code. But certain feature sets are available in that 6.0, getting a little too off into the weeds there, but know that there's some variations there that can be certainly helpful. So early 2018, the controller was renamed off the Smart Cell Gateway into the SmartZone controller, officially rebranded to attack a broader market as opposed to its original target focus. And it was positioned that way in an attempt to kind of supersede the Zone Director controller of the time. So a quick bullet point list here of some things that really make it stand out from the Zone Director. I'd say chief among them, that first bullet point right there, is the SmartZone is available in both an appliance, a physical appliance that you can have on site, as well as a virtual machine. So not only does that give you a little more flexibility over the strictly appliance version of the Zone Director, it helps capture some of that scale in a potentially even more cost-effective model. MSRP, the virtual machine of the SmartZone, runs cheaper than the Zone Director. So can be if the customer already has the infrastructure in place, it can be certainly a helpful approach when looking at the cost perspective. The other thing that helps us enable as well with the virtual machine is a sort of pseudo cloud hosted, an MSP type model for you, our partners, and for anyone who's potentially interested. Instead of needing to have this one big controller on all these individual sites, you can manage a large number of customers from an MSP type standpoint out of a virtual SmartZone cluster or a SmartZone cluster. So it expands that capacity that was there in the zone director before, and we can go very broad, very multi-site, and enable you to have a single pane of glass to peer into to manage all of those different customer networks out of a single SmartZone or SmartZone cluster. And that ties in there with the scalability. So per SmartZone controller or node, and then of course there are some dependencies that go on here as you're looking across the different options. You can scale from a single access point up to 10,000 access points, which is pushing that from 25K to 150K plus clients across that entire network. Which really did expand upon the 150 access point cap that existed there with the zone director before. You could add an additional zone director in redundantly as well, as you can here with the SmartZone, but this expanded capacity is really the name of the game. And like I mentioned with the virtual machine before, this helps us capture that without really changing the cost at all. Last couple of bullet points here too, the N+1 active cluster architecture. So that's how we're able to get up to some of those crazy numbers there. And the following slide, I think, she'll show that a little bit better. But essentially, with the SmartZone, we can configure up to 4 of the controllers in a cluster to benefit off of each the capacity of each of those instances. So not only is it great to have an active standby, you've got a failover, you've got another controller that's ready to pick up and move as soon as something happens to it in a worst case scenario, right? You can go all the way up to 4 floor nodes in the cluster to expand your capacity. So really helpful if you have quite large scale deployments, but great for resiliency even in the smaller scale deployments. And speaking of resiliency, a slide later on, I'll go over this in detail. And if you look up that SmartZone client survivability PDF that's listed there on the slide as well, some good information we'll go over about how the APs, as a Ruckus standard, will hang on and they will keep functioning if in the worst case scenario something does happen to that controller. If you lose connectivity, the APs will keep chugging along, doing what they're supposed to do until you're able to get that resolved, which can certainly be helpful. From the history perspective, still, the SmartZone largely played feature catch-up with the zone director until version 3.5, so early 2017. So right there before that rebrand into the SmartZone name. But as it's been in the last several years, the SmartZone is now certainly a fully network controller. So not only does it manage the wireless as the zone director did and has expanded upon the feature set available in the zone director and the capacity available in the zone director, we've also, with the 5.0 release of SmartZone, we're able to manage our ICX line of switches as well, which is truly a fantastic ease of management platform for both switches in the network and access points. So if you have any customers that have both, this is a great thing to throw on top of that. It will make everyone's lives a little bit easier, able to configure and manage those switches without diving into the CLI, or is always a great positioning tool if you're looking to bring a customer onto the fold if they're using competitor switches in any vein. I mean, you'd like to move ththose to Ruckus, as of course I selfishly would like you to do. It's great to be able to have that single pane of glass, work through one consistent interface and manage potentially large numbers of sites, large numbers of access points and switches, all out of that single GUI. So that does it for that on the brief history of SmartZone. And here's a look, as I said, of what the family kind of looks like. So this gets into some of the scale, the kind of size that you can add on to each of these. So a little bit of variance here across the different platforms. The SmartZone 144 that you can see there in the upper left-hand corner is going to be the physical appliance that we have today. If any of you are at all familiar with the SmartZone 104 or the SmartZone 124, those are the predecessors to the 144. Essentially, those have gone by the wayside at this point. There was a chip that was used to create those appliances specifically that was outright end of lifed by the manufacturer. So even though we could put those boxes together, we didn't have one part to be able to maintain them. So we had moved on from those. That brings us to the SmartZone 144 and the current life cycle of the product today. Realistically, if you're familiar with those at all, very, very similar, just expanded capacity, has some additional ports as well. If you can see on the image there, there are a number of 10 gig interfaces on the 144 that you can use for various uplink connections as well. And that's going to get you up to that 120,000 clients per cluster, 6K APs, or up to 1,200 switches, excuse me. And which is a point to monitor as well. Something important to know is you're going out and deploying different SmartZone instances across the customer base. The switches and APs do take up a different amount of capacity within the controller. So that 5-to-1 ratio is really your sweet spot and where you want to be with how many of each device you have on a controller. You can absolutely strictly go switches all the way if you just have a customer who it makes sense to have a management platform on top of all of their switches, or all APs, or a healthy mix in the middle there. But you definitely want to make sure that you're managing your resources appropriately and not overexpanding on one way or the other. On the right side there, you've got your virtual SmartZone. This, I would say, is the bread and butter of what I deal with every day as a Ruckus systems engineer. I'm having a large number of conversations that revolve around this product specifically. As I mentioned before, it comes in at a very affordable price point, especially if the customer already has existing infrastructure that they can spin the virtual machine up on. It is compatible with most all of the existing VM infrastructure types that you can think of. It's very, very easy to download, spin up, move very quickly, and can handle, from a lot to a little. So while the 144 on the baseline does have a little bit more capacity, the virtual SmartZone, of course, can be clustered up as well and reach a pretty great deal. On the bottom side here, sticking to the physical infrastructure, the SmartZone 300, this is what the current carrier grade product is. If you're running a truly large managed service provider type network, or a large campus, or a large scale of any nature, the SmartZone 300 from a physical appliance perspective is definitely going to be your go-to. Really expands the capacity up there above what the 144 is able to, but it's certainly niche in that respect. There's only a certain type of customer who's going to really be wanting something like this. On the flip side, jumping back over to the virtual appliance, the virtual SmartZone high scale is strictly the same file, right? The same OVA file that you would otherwise download to get the controller up and going, but is kind of a flip of the switch, if you will, when you download the SmartZone to turn it from the essentials that we looked at the top there to the virtual high scale. So the high scale is what you would definitely want to be looking at if you're managing a managed service type environment, to be able to segment those customers off in ways that potentially you could even have those customers be able to have some level of visibility into at least their own instance, in addition to whatever else you're going on. And this is what, gives you that expanded capacity as well. Of course, as you go up and up and up, that virtual machine is going to require more on the resources side, and there's a slide we'll touch on here in just a second, where we'll go into the resources, but always something to be mindful on the virtual side, that the capacity is there. We just got to make sure that the equipment that it's running on is able to handle it. And the last little piece here that's always good to mention here is the data plane. So if you remember nothing else about the data plane, do know that the physical data plane goes with the physical appliance, and the virtual data plane goes with the virtual appliance. Those two have to be the same. You can't run a mismatch of one to the other. Causes some interesting kerfuffles to go along with that. So virtual to virtual, physical to physical, keeps everything nice and happy. The data plane is great if you're needing to do any sort of tunneling. Specifically, internal network, external network, the tunnel all happens in the data plane portion of this product. And it is an add-on that goes onto it. So if you don't need that extra functionality, you're not having to pay for it up front, which can be incredibly helpful, again, especially in the virtual side of things, where it can help us keep the cost down pretty far. So from a controller perspective, SKUs that you would look at, items that you would look at to put on a bill of materials or browsing through the price list, this is where the product portfolio stands. And again, as I mentioned, that virtual smart zone in the upper right-hand corner there on my desk is what I'm talking about all day long, what I'm positioning, I'm giving demos of, and what have you throughout the day. So I definitely think it's a good place to look if you're at all interested in integrating SmartZone as a part of your business or in your customer ecosystems, or potentially as a replacement for the Zone Director. So having said that and kind of looked at the scale, here's another visualization of the smart zones as well as it sits to the rest of our portfolio today. So kind of starting from the very large working down, you see the virtual high scale there, you see the smart zone essentials, you see the 144 and the different AP capacity numbers, client capacity numbers, and what you can get up to with the 4-node cluster there. And as we walk down the portfolio as well, always useful in their own places. The Zone Director 1200, you can certainly see the difference between the Smart Zone and the Zone Director there in terms of client capacity and access point capacity as well. The Smart Zone is nearing the end of its time here with us. I don't believe there's an official date for that at that point, but would always definitely, when having this conversation, from an R&D perspective, outside of making sure we've got new Wi-Fi 6 access points on the Zone Director, there hasn't been a lot of innovation put that way, which is, generally the writing on the wall of being ready to move on from something. So it definitely, if you've got older Zone Director customers, it's worth a conversation around the Smart Zone for when that date does inevitably come. And then the Unleashed here on the very small side as well. Unleashed is great for single site deployments. It's something I run in my house today, but it certainly has a place for SMB type customers who really want to help keep the cost down. There's no additional controller appliance that goes on with that. So that's part of the keeping the cost down, keeping the support costs down with all of that. Pretty easy to manage, easy to spin up, and you can kind of set it and forget it and go on. And of course, we have our cloud controller over the top of the entirety of the portfolio. Since that's based on our infrastructure, our own Ruckus NOC within the US and in the other geos, relatively that is infinitely scalable. As if we were ever to run out of capacity, we would just simply have to add more and build that up and up and up and up. Something that I always do like to mention about the cloud as well, the GUI is tailored a little bit differently than how it looks in the Smart Zone, but the core of what the Ruckus Cloud is realistically a Smart Zone. We are essentially running a custom tailored version of the Smart Zone to support our cloud. So for us, that is our cloud still. Sometimes I call cloud Smart Zone Lite. But a great kind of nod in the vein of SmartZone being a great MSP cloud type solution that you could potentially position to your customers in use cases where that would be helpful for you. So that's where the portfolio stands today, kind of as we've talked about SmartZone, kind of see that in the general scope. So jumping back into SmartZone specifically here. So hit some high points about some true differentiators that might be interested to your customers or might really be kind of a piece that pushes you over the edge. So the active cluster, as we've talked about before, for both the wired and wireless, is incredibly helpful to be able to have multiple controllers spun up in tandem, actively utilizing those resources and having an active ready in case something fails over or what have you, really gives this controller a lot of oomph. Additionally, you have that separate management, you have the control plane, you have the data plane, you have these different pieces that you can put together to establish what you need there, in addition to the multi-site and the multi-tenant support. So when you get up to the high scale there, I'm able to support multiple customer locations, multiple instances, a large number of access points or a modest number of access points, really what the need calls for in a very effective way is great for that, either an enterprise customer or an MSP class customer to get those needs met. On the resiliency and scalability side, this is a little bit we talked about earlier. So the access points are going to continue to operate during a controller outage. Everything that the APs do is largely on their end. The controller is just there to kind of push them along, push down configurations, and make sure everybody's happily working together. So, worst case scenario does fall, a controller does go out, something tragic happens to the network, but there's still power. APs are still going to keep going. They've still got that network connectivity. The APs are still going to keep going, doing what they're supposed to be doing until you get that controller up and going, which can be very, very helpful. Additionally, as we talked about as well, you can go up to 4 nodes in that cluster. So you have an N+1 for redundancy and scalability. So you can go up to 4 smart zones for that 3+1 to really expand the capacity of what the smart zone can do, or really expand the reliability with redundancy built in throughout the network there. As well as you have the Cassandra database synchronization in real time across all these cluster nodes. So what that means is, even though you could have these clusters in different locations, different geos, what have you, they're all recognizing everything at the same time. These controllers will, when you sync one, you can sync them all and not have to worry about any mismatches or anything going wrong if you're touching different places in different times. And of course, the geo redundancy there. Don't have to have these in the same place, right? Or you can, it's great, but you're able to spread these out and operate smart zones out of different data centers potentially, especially in an MSP type model. You could have an East and a West and have that up and functioning in a very effective way. And flexibility as well is another key talking point. So one of, in my opinion, the best features that the SmartZone has to offer, and to my knowledge, this is not something that any of our competitors out there support at this point in time, is the ability to have older access point firmware running on a per zone basis within the controller. So essentially what that means is, if you've got a customer, say, who has older equipment, but they're not able to potentially migrate to a new controller yet because the budget's not there, something hasn't happened, no one stroked the check, whatever, to get them to do a full refresh all at once. Within the SmartZone, we can run one zone specifically off on a 3.6.2, one of the older controller firmware versions, and support those older access points, while simultaneously running a new controller zone, say it's the 5.2.2, with all of the current Wi-Fi 6 access points, that piece of the portfolio. So this is a fantastic tool to help ease the migration for those customers. So they're not having to go all at once to make that big rip and replace to get the entire network in and out in one fell swoop. They can kind of move along as they need to, go one building at a time, one room at a time, and whatever is most effective, and really helps, specifically what it says on there, improve that return on investment. That controller is going to be there for them, even though and if they've got older equipment, as we go on along the life cycle of a product. And from a sales perspective as well, that definitely gives you the opportunity to help and maintain some of those customers, right? If the customer is going to have to go for a big old full rip and replace, that gives them an opportunity to go look elsewhere potentially. Might mean another partner as well if they're getting really excitable about it. But with this, very easy to just go, okay, we're going to replace some of those 73, 72 access points, the older 4-digit APs, with some of the Wi-Fi 6 stuff like an R750. But we're going to keep some other ones too. We'll have those running in perfect harmony together within the controller. So there are specific firmware versions that does support. We always want to make sure the compatibility is there and we're looking at the right things with the right access points. Always a great thing to talk to your Ruckus SE about, someone like me, any of my inside counterparts, or any of my counterparts in the field. I'm happy to have that conversation with you, the Securematics team as well, of course, to make sure we're getting the right things taken care of for that customer. But I've spent a lot of time on that specifically because I do think it's a true differentiator, and it has certainly made my life easier as well. Within that flexibility too, that's not on this slide, there is a built-in migration tool from the zone director as well. So we can help customers migrate if they've got older APs, or they're wanting to take advantage of something like that with the SmartZone. It's a much easier migration to bring that older zone director, get an older zone director or the zone director 1200 into the fold in the SmartZone. additional points here, good to talk about as well. You can tunnel your traffic, whether that be per SSID, per Ethernet port. So it gives you some flexibility about how you want to move that traffic along. We use standards-based APIs on the JSON and RESTful interfaces. So there's a lot of really creative stuff that you can do with APIs within the SmartZone. I have seen a truly tremendous amount of creative work that Ruckus engineers and otherwise have put in to accomplish some and address some creative solutions to some difficult problems using APIs within the interface. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in what you want to do there. And the granular and transferable licensing pool. So something we hadn't touched on quite yet, the SmartZone, if you're familiar with the Zone Director, is licensed in the same way. So a bill of materials will really have 4 pieces on that for you. So you'll have the controller itself, whether that's virtual or physical, support for that. You'll have licenses, so that's a per AP license model. So for every access point you have, there will be one access point license to tie that to the controller, and a support piece for those AP licenses. So the nice part about that is that the support piece, the licensing piece, it does bind to that AP serial number, but it is not permanently bound to that interface. So if for whatever reason something happens, you have to replace a unit, it's time to upgrade because the equipment is old and you're ready to move on to the new ones. It's as simple as revoking that license and adding it to the new access point. And support follows along with that as well. So that makes it agnostic of AP model, whether you're using an R350, an R550, a T750, what have you. That license and that support is going to apply to that access point. And it does help make migration between different controllers in the case of redundancy. If something goes down or what have you, that license pool is shared within that cluster. So if something needs to fail over, you don't need both instances to be fully licensed up and ready to go. You just need to have the licenses that you need for your network, and that cluster will take care of the rest and make sure everything's up and going until you can get that first instance installed. So lots of sub points within this slide specifically, but the pieces I would definitely want to take away from this, this is an enterprise MSP class grade product. It can scale, it's resilient, and it does have a lot of flexibility to help keep your customers and keep them happy. And I jumped the gun on the licensing here, so we'll touch on it very briefly. I won't waste a whole ton of time on this slide, but this is essentially how the licensing works again. Everything is activated through the Lyman program, third-party cloud licensing solution in our support portal. So just go to support.ruckuswireless.com. You'll be able to activate everything within there under the customer. Like I said, licenses are shared between nodes. The only exception to that is the RTU, the right to use license, that just gives you the instance of the controller itself. And if something happens with that and you need to move that around, there are some extra steps via RMA that we need to do in the support side to mitigate that. But it is also just as simple if you wanted to kick the tires on your own SmartZone and you have access to the support portal today, as I would assume as a Ruckus partner you do, you could go out there, download the SmartZone right now. It has one AP license, so if you've got an AP in your lab that you'd want to spin up on that and mess around with, that is available for you to download as soon as now to start kicking the tires. Licensing options as they go below tier 2. One of the things I didn't mention as well, ICX switches also require a license, so that is one license per ICX switch. The slight caveat there is there's no license support for the switches like there is with the access points. The support piece of that is simply tied into the base support of the switch. So if you have any of the standard RMT supports on the switch, a next day, anything like that, or you bought the RMT-3 bundle, anything of that nature will cover you off on the SmartZone side. No need to worry about it. And there's some additional licensing for some add-ons if you wanted to do URL filtering, SCI, which is an analytics tool that is mostly shifted focus now to cloud analytics or Ruckus analytics, which you can add on there for an incredibly deeper, more granular view of what's going on in and across your network, and Spot as well, which is our smart positioning software as well that you can tie into the SmartZone. So lots of additional things you can add on there beyond just the management of the access points and the switches within the controller. So here's the eval steps. from a licensing perspective. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to go out and grab that RTU from the support portal right now, you absolutely could. That's valid for 90 days. So it's got one permanent AP license that sticks on that. So you can have at that if you wanted to run one AP. That is absolutely yours. Same with the switch as well. One switch license sticks on there. The 90 days gives you a little bit of an expanded access. So again, to bring the Zone Director back into the conversation, the Zone Director, when you purchase that, it came with 5 AP licenses. So the trial here is showing you those 5 AP licenses as well. That 5 licenses does not stick with the SmartZone, but you can have that from a demo perspective. If you want to spin this up for a proof of concept with a customer, show them what everything would look like in their network. Very, very easy to do so. The data plane, of course, is not required, but if that functionality is needed, there is a virtual data plane RTU that you can download as well and tie in with that SmartZone controller to get everything spun up and ready to go. So from as far as a getting things going perspective, it's very quick and easy to go out to the support portal, download the RTU, get the OVA file spun up in your existing VMware space, and you're off to the races. But if at any point, you have questions about anything in the vein of that, or what that looks like moving forward in configuration and all of those finite pieces, again, I would encourage you to reach out to a Ruckus engineer like myself, any of my counterparts on the inside of the field or the Securematics team. We can definitely help you along with that process and what that looks like. So scaling with the virtual smart zones. I talked about this a little bit earlier when we were looking at that controller slide. So the capacity for the virtual smart zone is going to depend on the resources that it is getting from its VM instance. So every Ruckus product, regardless of what it is going to have some sort of quick start or getting started guide on our support portal. And if you haven't looked at those, I would definitely recommend you take a brief look, especially if it's a product you're not as familiar with. Some of that will ship in the boxes with the equipment as well. And it's a really handy just one-sheeter on how to get everything stood up, spun up, and ready to go. But the virtual smart zone specifically, since there is no physical anything going out with that, getting started guide is on the support portal, available for you to look at, and it'll specifically lay out what the resource requirements are for certain thresholds of devices. So what, the amount of CPU, RAM, disk space that virtual host needs to have to get the correct sizing. So there's a couple of different tables. You want to take a look at both of them and make sure that you're there. So it's not a bad thing to go over the top on that. It's never wrong to have too many resources in that regard. But the smart zone is going to take everything that it can get up to where it needs to be to meet that. So there have certainly been, in my experience, a couple of times where customers, the first kind of threshold there on the resources is 100 access points. And they'll have a customer either doing a POC or they'll be doing their deployment, and get an email back of like, what's going on? I thought you said this could do more than 100. And we quickly take a look under the hood. We drop down to here where you can see the cluster capacity. This is a screenshot right out of the SmartZone controller. You go into under Systems, General Settings. And we take a look down here, and it says, total capacity here 100. But obviously they've got licenses for more, and that's when we have to have that conversation. Pull down this getting started guide, run through the requirements for the system, and they bump all that up, and everything is good to go and you move along. So can definitely serve as a gotcha in some POCs or various deployments of that nature. So definitely keep an eye out for that when going the virtual route. But it also does give you flexibility as well, meaning you don't have to use a whole lot beyond what is necessary if you're doing smaller networks. You don't need to use the full capacity, full resource allocation that the SmartZone is capable of if you've got something in the vein of 25 to 30 access points or something of that nature. But all of this easily accessible under the General Settings tab within the SmartZone controller itself. And back to clustering here for a second as we move on past that. So this active clustering is available within all of the SmartZone products in the portfolio. The clusters, again, like we kind of talked about, you need to do like to like. So we want to do virtual with virtual. We want to do physical with physical. We can't unfortunately mix and match those different types if that was something that was required for one reason or another. So always want to stick like to like if you're doing this clustering. But the benefit of the single pane of glass comes back again here within the cluster as you wind up with visibility into all 4 controllers at the same time. So if all of these are active here, you're seeing everything, that each and every one of these controllers is doing. You can go in, make your configurations, you can view statistics on the AP, you can see events that are going on within the controller. Everything's going on across every single one of those nodes. They're able to see each other, talk to each other, and give you a very rich pool of data to be able to handle whatever is going on at the network at that given point in time. This active-active clustering as well also supports hot additions and deletions of cluster nodes. So if you need to scale down, if you need to take one out and hot swap it, replace it, you can do that without having to take the entire cluster down. You can add and delete as you need to, so long as you've got that base of whatever your initial controller there is up and going. And even then you can replace that one as long as the rest of the cluster is there going. And as anything of this nature does, it gives you a pretty great deal of redundancy and resiliency. So if a node fails, if something goes on, or one of the pieces of the cluster is independently doing an upgrade, the clients aren't going to see any of that. The rest of the network is going to take on the load from that controller while it's in a down state, and that traffic is going to be moved along, handled appropriately. And from a client perspective, as you're sitting there browsing the web on your phone or doing work on your laptop, whatever the customer needs to be doing at that point in time, everything should look pretty happy from their end. And as I mentioned earlier, those licenses are shared amongst the pool. If you are running multiple environments, we do want to make sure those are aligned correctly. But if those licenses are tied to a node that fatally fails, then we can get those up, we can get those moved. We want to get that done within about the 45-day window to make sure everything's preserved there. And that's just in the case if something fatally fails. In a normal failover type environment, that license pool will be shared and moved across the different instances. And just another look here at the N+1 type of deployment. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we've got a 3+1 active cluster all working in one data center. And in the other here, we have the 3+1 working in 2 data centers. In the 2 data center example, if one of the DCs is a cold standby or taken offline for maintenance, then the whole cluster is going to be marked out of operation. So something you want to be mindful about when you're deploying in these types of situations. But you can always improve the resiliency by distributing nodes across more locations or activate the geo redundancy there as you go along. But again, just some things to be mindful of as you're working across different deployments. And this is the AP survivability slide that I talked about a little bit earlier. The local state is designed, based off of the AP firmware. So connection loss to the SmartZone controller isn't affecting the core operations of the APs, right? The APs are flashed with the firmware when you load them into the controller for the first time. It's part of the up process as you bring the AP in. The controller will flash the firmware down on it, make sure it's all up and operational. And the APs are doing what they're doing. They're passing traffic. They know where things need to go. The big core functionalities of those access point features aren't required for it to keep going with the controller in mind. So clients can continue to connect and roam if you're doing an open network, pre-shared key, 802.1x, if you've got a guest access portal, internal web portal, if you're doing an external web portal, potentially you're using Cloud Path for some sort of management functionality where you're filtering traffic off into different areas based on permissions and whatnot. All of that there is going to keep going with the asterisk there that it does require a local or available authentication server where it makes sense. So if that authentication is all getting done on the controller end, of course, if the controller is down, that's going to be a problem. But if that is still there local and available, everything's going to keep going hunky-dory, and the APs are still going to keep passing traffic. It's really that roaming and new connections that could potentially be affected in that instance. So I have rambled on for long enough. I've hit about the 45 mark here, a quarter till the hour. So last slide from me here, is I have given you an absolute mouthful on SmartZone, and I hope that there's been some useful information in there for you. You know, from a what's next perspective, I would definitely recommend you take a look at what's called the raza 200. This is the Ruckus Associate SmartZone Administrator course that we have available free for partners on the CommScope University. You can get there through the training portal part of the Ruckus Partner Portal. It'll take you straight into the CommScope University where all of our training material is housed. I've taken this course. There's a couple of different versions of it that you can do. There is a self-paced online version that you can enroll yourself in and watch modules and work through at your leisure. It's about 1.5 days, which includes labs and the exam at the end of the self-paced. But there is also a instructor-led version that'll go for about 4 days time of instructor-led time, about 4 8 to 10 hour-ish days. A number of my peers were just in that recently as we hosted one. The instructors in that are fantastic. I definitely recommend it if you have the opportunity. In the other instances of that I have taken, I have learned a tremendous amount from that. And this information is just out there available to you to help you figure out configuration, administration, really dives down into the nooks and crannies outside of some of the simple config and get going information on that. So with that, that is all from me. If you've got any questions now, I'd like to open it up for Q&A, and we'll do my best to address what I can.
Thanks, Jesse. We do have some questions. Just before we get started with the Q&A, I did want to note we are hosting a raza 200 on October 5th and 6th. I popped the registration page in the chat, so if anybody's interested, you can register directly through that link.
Awesome, good stuff. Yeah, would definitely, if you're at all planning on using SmartZone in any capacity, I would definitely recommend spending some time with that. It is a great training, great material.
All right, we did have some questions come through. First one second. How does Ruckus gear play with other gear that may already be installed?
With other gear. So if you're talking about competitor equipment specifically, we aren't going to be able to manage a competitor's equipment, nor are they going to be able to manage ours. Unfortunately, if you're putting both of those together in an ecosystem, you're going to have two separate control planes that are managing things at the same time, and that can potentially get a little messy. If you're talking about other equipment, from a general networking perspective, even switches, even though we can't manage our competitor switches, the SmartZone and all Ruckus equipment plays very, very nice in that ecosystem. We don't have a lot of the gross proprietary things that kind of tend to lock you out and trap you in a room and make you only have to do one thing. We try to play with others as best we can.
Okay, great, thanks. For small clients with 10 APs, please discuss Unleashed versus ZD 1200 versus SmartZone.
Yeah, absolutely. So 10 plus APs, I would even potentially throw cloud hosted in there to you as an option. I definitely think you have a lot of flexibility with an SMB customer of that size. Personally, I would gear towards Unleashed there, especially if it's single site. Unleashed is pretty easy to use, quick to throw up, and as I did mention earlier in that slide, has some pretty an affordable cost associated with it from the support side. Where I would potentially steer you towards one of the other controller models, and at this point from where I sit, I don't tend to steer towards the Zone Director. As I mentioned, it's kind of getting towards the end of its life. So I kind of steer towards the cloud or the SmartZone when that conversation comes up. Really, it comes down to feature set. So the Unleashed is getting there, but is still pretty bare bones as far as the controller is concerned. So if the customer is wanting some advanced feature set, or they have an IT team that really wants to get in there and turn all of the buttons and knobs, that's where I would steer them towards something like a SmartZone. Or even potentially, if you've got a number of those 10 AP customers, standing a virtual SmartZone up for yourself and operating in an MSP type of environment to where you could be selling that SmartZone out to them.
Okay, great. Next question, do you still use Beamflex or has that changed?
Yep, absolutely. Beamflex is still there. It is on by default in each and every one of our access points. And if I, to get on the sales pitch slightly, it is still a strong differentiator for us. That antenna technology really accelerates and helps us take even further advantage of things such as Wi-Fi 6 when these new standards go out. Beamflex just gets better and better with how all of that works.
Okay. Please discuss the new 6GHz wireless APs, what's coming and when?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So to give a brief backstory on that for those who might not know, beginning part of, or I guess is middle to beginning part of last year, the FCC, just after Wi-Fi 6, 802.11ax was brought into adoption, the FCC opened up a new band of spectrum that they're calling Wi-Fi 6E. So essentially, as we have today, we have the 2.4 gigahertz radio or spectrum, excuse me, and the 5 gigahertz spectrum available to us to use. So each of the access points, each of your Ruckus access points is going to have 2 radios, one for the 2.4, one for the 5 gigahertz. This opening of this 6 gigahertz space is going to exponentially increase the allocation that we have in the air for wireless communication. So it's really exciting, but it is going to require client devices to have a 6 gigahertz capable radio in them. Even as we make jumps to something like 802.11ax with Wi-Fi 6, it's not a chipset thing. You physically need to have that radio in there. So hopefully 6 gigahertz should clear up a lot of the noise that we have in 2.4 today, which is why a lot of customers steer towards using 5 gigahertz in those environments. So Ruckus does have an access point on the way. It was originally planned for Q4 of this year, but it's looking like that's going to be more reasonably Q1 of next year with the challenges around the chip shortage. But that is going to be a tri-band. So it's going to support 2.4, 5 gigahertz and the new 6 gigahertz out of one access point. So definitely something to look forward with that while you are cheersing out to the new year.
Awesome, thank you. Are there new small versions of SmartZone coming to replace Zone Director? And is there any ETA if so?
Good question. So there's definitely been a lot of conversation around what that's going to look like. There is nothing concrete that I can tell you that is on the way. I can say Unleashed has been getting a lot of love as a result of that, with some more robust feature sets, and there might be something that comes out of that. But as it stands right now, there's nothing that's going to take the place of the zone directors specifically for smaller customers. But again, I will say, if they do have that VM infrastructure in place, and it doesn't have to be crazy. I'm running SmartZone on a small NUC on my desk right now. It's strictly all it does, but it's not, taking a lot of resources. That MSRP price point for the virtual SmartZone is, I want to say $999, while the MSRP price point for the Zone Director is $1,200. So it is still cheaper to get a virtual SmartZone than a physical Zone Director as it stands today.
Okay, great. And it looks like this is our last question. What is Ruckus CommScope working on in regards to security? Are you affiliating with any security specific vendors?
Yeah, great question there as well. Definitely lots of conversation ongoing about that as well. I can definitely share that, but don't unfortunately have a lot else beyond that I can talk about from the security perspective. I would always, in some vein, point you towards CloudPath as you're talking about security a little bit. I know that's probably not exactly what you're getting at with that question, but having some of that functionality between the onboarding and the user control and some various ways that we can granularly take apart the network with CloudPath, and segment that off is certainly useful in that regard. But as soon as I have anything more to share on that, I'd be more than happy to.
Okay, thanks. Well, looks like that's the end of our questions. So thanks so much, Jesse, for taking the time to present and answer the questions. I'm going to hand it back to Anan just for a quick wrap up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. Special thank to Jesse. And please let's consider the, I think Jesse brought up a great point where you can buy the virtual smart zone for, and that the huge difference in price between the virtual smart zone and the zone director. I know like getting the zone director end of life is a little bit of concern for many partners. We get all these questions, same questions every day. What's the replacement? So let's consider having the virtual smart zone. I would say also cloud Wi-Fi licenses are great. Of course, the unleashed access points are very easy to deploy. You can set them up as simple as maybe a couple minutes. Or using your an app on your smartphone. So please consider these, and hope it will help. Again, please feel free to reach out to the solutions architect team. We can help with replacements, alternatives, and any questions you might have. We can also forward any questions to Jesse, or you can reach out to him directly. That's it for me. I actually wanted to thank you all again for joining, and look forward to working with. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.